first official leak for Chapter 27 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex has been released from the Naruto team. And in it, for the first time in what feels like months, is a pretty crazy reveal. See, because while usually the official leaks usually just show us like the first page of the chapter where nothing's happening, I think maybe they've heard my complaining about the official leaks and decided to up their game. Because in the first official leak from the Naruto team for this month's chapter of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex, we see that Jura has returned to Konoha. And while the idea of Jura sauntering into Konoha is not necessarily a new or even necessarily intimidating concept, something about this visit feels different. The combination of Jura learning human emotions, Inojin being set up as the protector of Himawari, and a couple of other factors make me believe that this trip to Konoha from Jura is not just for fun or knowledge, but rather to deliver an ultimatum to the village that he respects, telling them to hand over Himawari or to have their village destroyed. Yes, I believe the days of Konoha being a safe space are over, and I believe in Chapter 27, Jura saunters into Konoha to deliver that message exactly. So what does this mean for the future of Konoha? Does it mean that Himawari is going to go with Jura willingly? Does it mean that Konoha's destruction is nigh? And what does all of this have to do with Mamushi? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Himawari is in peril. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, you guys can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to the one-on-one fights, and 1010's about to get her spine rearranged. I'd also like to apologize before we get into this video about the sparsity of how often I've been posting here. Apparently, fostering 9 dogs, 8 of which are puppies, makes it hard to get to work sometimes. Only got a week left with the foster dogs though, so I'll be back to my regular posting schedule soon. So, like I said, the first official leak from Chapter 27 is out. So, what's going on? Well, it's one of those leaks that's kind of like an onion. You're looking at it just at its base level, it's not all that impressive. However, the longer you look at it and the more you begin to peel back at what's happening on this page, the more you begin to realize the massive amount of information being conveyed by this single page of manga. See, because on this single page of manga, we see that somewhere in Konoha at a dango shop. Dango are the glutinous rice dumplings that are eaten on a stick that Anko really loved, that made her a little bit larger in Boruto. They're a Japanese sweet treat. They're really good. You have them with tea. But anyways, at a dango shop somewhere within the confines of Konoha, Jura is sitting on a bench, enjoying dango and drinking tea. And that seems to be about all that he's doing. He's staring contemplatively at his dango. He's sipping his tea in silence. And kind of like with all of his other trips to Konoha, he's not causing much of a scene. I mean, people are stopping and looking at him, but he's not necessarily doing anything out of the ordinary. And even though Jura is seemingly just enjoying the sights and sounds of Konoha, we see that Inojin, who is presumably still connected to Shikamaru through the conversation that he was facilitating between Shikamaru and Kashin Koji and Boruto, is asking Shikamaru if he's serious. To which Shikamaru confirms that he is, and lets Kashin Koji and Inojin and Boruto know that he's confirmed the presence of Jura in Konoha to the sensory team and told the Konoha police to not get involved, but for the moment there's literally nothing they can do. And yeah, that's fair. There is literally nothing that Konoha can do about Jura right now. I mean, Boruto could hand over his body to Momoshiki, link up with Jura, and try to defeat him, but then that battle would happen in Konoha. And that's kind of the beauty of Jura identifying Konoha as a place of interest, because now the desire to not destroy Konoha comes from both ends. But with all that said, now that we understand exactly what's happening in this leak, what does this leak mean for what we're gonna see in Chapter 27 of Boruto? Well, first and foremost, like a lot of the first leaks that we get from the official Naruto team, I believe this leak is going to come from relatively early on in the chapter. And unfortunately, I believe this reveal that Jura is inside of Konoha is actually going to be used as a way to halt the progress of several events that are currently happening in TBV. For example, as we see that Shikamaru is conveying this information, at least through Inojin, we know that this information is being conveyed presumably to Kashin Koji, while Shikamaru and Kashin Koji are still connected. And therefore, this reveal that Jura is in Konoha will most likely be the thing that ends that conversation between Shikamaru and Kashin Koji, and is therefore also the thing that facilitates Boruto sending Inojin back to Konoha, now with the understanding that he is on Team Boruto. However, I also believe that this reveal that Jura is enjoying a sweet treat inside of Konoha, a succulent Chinese meal if you shall, will also be the thing that ends the battle between Sarada and Daemon, and therefore Jura's reveal will serve as a way to draw out the tension of these individual moments. See, because while Boruto did tell Inojin that even even though there's no exits in this room, he would send him back to Konoha once they were done. We did cut away from the conversation between Shikamaru and Kashin Koji in chapter 26 before we saw it finished. The last we heard, Kashin Koji was telling Shikamaru about Mamushi, his abilities, and how to defeat him. On top of this, the real, actual cliffhanger from chapter 26 was the setup of the conflict between Sarada and Daemon. Now, some of you might be saying, but there's not really much of a conflict here. Daemon simply speed blitzed Sarada before she got the chance to activate her Sharingan. And you're right, technically that is what happened. Ada identified that more likely than not, Sarada and Sumire were not affected by her charm Shinjutsu, on account of the fact that while directly in front of her, they were able to talk about their feelings for somebody else, something that nobody else has ever been able to do. And because of this, Daemon came to the realization that because they are not affected by Ada's charm Shinjutsu, that both Sarada and Sumire had the capacity to injure Ada if they ever wanted to. Now, upon realizing that her back was against a wall and that Daemon was most likely going to attack them when putting 2 and 2 together, that Sarada and Sumire could attack Ada, Sarada attempted to activate her Monkey Kill Sharingan. However, before she was able to do that, Daemon popped behind her and grabbed her by the neck and said that Sharingan can't do anything if I kill you before you activate it. And so while yes, chapter 27 could simply focus on Daemon holding Sarada by the neck and saying, if you ever try to injure Ada, I'll snap your neck like a twig, I personally think that would be a really bad look for a character we're trying to set up as the deuteragonist of this story. Well, yes, Daemon is crazy powerful, and establishing him as powerful is probably really important right now on account of the fact that he's probably gonna be the person responsible for battling against Mamushi, but considering the fact that we've spent a large chunk of 2 Blue Vortex trying to establish Sarada as powerful as people like Boruto or Kawaki, watching her get speed blitzed by Daemon would kind of disintegrate a lot of those efforts. And therefore, one of my favorite theories that spun out of chapter 26 was that in actuality, Daemon didn't speed blitz Sarada, but rather he just believes that he did. See, because Sarada does activate her Monkey Kill Sharingan in chapter 26, and while we have seen that one of her eye's abilities is Ohirame, a gravity black hole derivative of Amaterasu, we haven't seen the ability of her other eye. And if we track Sarada based off the amount of times that she's been connected to Itachi symbolically, it stands to reason that if one of her eyes has the derivative ability of Amaterasu, her other eye has an ability derivative of Tsukiyomi, and therefore there's at least a decent-ish chance that instead of being speed blitzed, Sarada actually placed Daemon under some kind of genjutsu. And thus chapter 27 could feature something like a battle between Sarada and Daemon. But I don't think that's going to happen. See, even if Sarada is able to place Daemon under some kind of genjutsu, and maybe he realizes he is under genjutsu and then snaps out of it, I don't think that we're gonna see a battle between Daemon and Sarada kicking off, at least quite yet. See, because if I was writing the story, and God knows that I'm not, I believe it would be a much better writing decision to establish that Sarada has a means of affecting Daemon through the usage of her ocular-based genjutsu, and then allow that to pay off substantially later down the line, when Daemon becomes an actual problem. Plant the seed in everyone's brain that Sarada is the only person who'll be able to take down Daemon, and then have her take down Daemon later. And Jura operates as the perfect tool to accomplish just that. See, because whether Shikamaru phoning to Ada to confirm the reports that he's hearing that Jura's inside of Konoha, or Shikamaru trying to reach out to Sarada to tell him that Jura, and therefore possibly Hidari, is close by in Konoha and to stay safe, there are a fair amount of ways that Shikamaru could interject into the situation that's currently unfolding between Daemon and Sarada. And thus, if Shikamaru does interfere in what's currently going on, it serves as a way to prolong this setup battle between Sarada and Daemon. Now, I believe that the most likely way that this battle between Sarada and Daemon will be given a rain check is Shikamaru reaching out to the both of them to warn them about Mamushi's incoming attack that is aimed at Ada. Because after all, if anybody should know about the fact that Mamushi is going to invade Konoha in a week and what his weaknesses are, it should probably be Ada and Daemon. And considering the fact that in chapter 26, we see Kashin Koji giving all of that information over to Shikamaru, then yeah, it feels highly likely that in some way or another, Shikamaru is going to be the reason that this battle between Sarada and Daemon is delayed. But at the end of the day, is that all Jura's arrival inside of Konoha truly is? A way to delay the payoff of a couple of cliffhangers that were set up in chapter 26, so that the payoffs of these cliffhangers can be used later on in basically the exact same way? Oh, we're gonna tease you with the idea of Sarada and Daemon fighting. Don't worry, it'll happen eventually, just not right now. Oh, we're gonna tease you with the idea that Boruto might have already forked his body over to Momoshiki and won't let Idajin go, even though we promised that he would. But don't worry, you'll find out later. Well, maybe. It'd be lazy writing, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing that ever happened in this manga. I believe that Jura's arrival in Konoha is actually a lot more than even that. See, because here's the thing, there's some big pieces of information that we can glean from this one page of content. The first being probably the most obvious, that Jura is in Konoha. See, because while we don't necessarily know that this Dango shop is in Konoha, and the people that are shown reacting to Jura's presence at the Dango shop don't really look like they're from Konoha. I mean, they don't really look like they're from anywhere. They're kind of ambiguous, but they're not like Konoha ninja. But we know that Shikamaru is the person who has situational control over what's happening surrounding Jura right now, which seems to imply, as he is the Hokage of Konoha, that this is happening inside of Konoha. We also know that while Shikamaru told everyone to stay away from Jura, that doesn't mean that everyone is going to. See, one of the cooler, minor details of this page that you'll notice if you look closely enough is that Jura is sitting on a two-person bench. Now, he could have been drawn standing or sitting in a chair, but no, rather he was shown sitting at a two-person bench purposely off to one side, as if he was waiting for somebody to fill up the other half. Now, this other seat could belong to somebody like Hidari, who's maybe off ordering his own dango or doing something else in Konoha. I believe that Jura is actually waiting for somebody, and I believe that somebody that Jura is waiting for is somebody that he specifically requested from Konoha to come meet him, and that person is most likely either Boruto or Himawari. But the more likely out of these two is Himawari. Not only because Jura wants to consume Himawari and understand himself fully after consuming the person that his heart draws him to, but also because Jura and Boruto meeting in Konoha introduces a myriad of other interesting and complicated political questions that need to get answered. Like if Boruto jumps into Konoha and openly has a conversation with Jura, well then it complicates the situation and basically confirms to the elders and the daimyo that in some way or another Boruto's probably working with the Shinju. It also opens the door for Jura and Boruto's conversation being cut off by people in Konoha who believe they stand a chance in a fight against either of them. So yeah, I believe that Jura is actually waiting for Himawari. See, here's the thing. We all know that Mamushi attacks Konoha in a week, right? And I filmed an entire video trying to answer the question of why Mamushi is allowed to attack Konoha in a week's time. See, Jura has placed a moratorium on Konoha. It's a safe place because it's filled with information, architecture, science, and humans that Jura wants to get to understand. Now, while this is just a convenient plot device to make sure that Jura doesn't fly into Konoha and kill Himawari while nobody stands a chance in combat against him, it is still an established rule inside of Boruto. But if Jura, the leader of the Shinju, has actively stated that he does not want Konoha destroyed, well then how or why is Mamushi allowed to invade Konoha, which will undoubtedly lead to a fair amount of destruction? And we kind of came to three answers. First of which being that Jura's not actually really the leader of the Shinju. Yes, he's the most powerful, but he doesn't necessarily get to dictate what the other Shinju do. And therefore, if a Shinju like Mamushi wanted to invade Konoha to get his hands on Ada, he would have the capacity to do that. The second answer that we came to was that Mamushi was acting in direct opposition of Jura's will. See, Mamushi isn't interested in information or architecture or science. There's actually a theory out there that every single one of the Shinju represent a different kind of love. And that theory states that Mamushi represents the lustful kind of love, the impulsive, rash, short-lived, but hot-burning kind of love. And thus Mamushi, as this lustful personality, who while Jura reads non-fiction novels and cries, is flipping through the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition in Konoha. And thus Mamushi not only doesn't understand why Jura doesn't want Konoha destroyed, but also seemingly doesn't care, because his lust for Ada is greater than anything that Jura's ever tried to describe to him. However, the third and final possibility we talked about is actually seemingly becoming the most likely, and that's not great because it's the worst case scenario. The third and final conclusion that we came to as to how Mamushi would be allowed to invade Konoha is that the moratorium on Konoha placed by Jura to say that Konoha should not be destroyed has been lifted. See, this trip from Jura could be about a lot more than just Dango. I believe the real reason that Jura has come to Konoha in chapter 27 is to tell either Konoha's leadership or Himawari herself that if Jura is not given an audience or just straight up given Himawari, that the moratorium on Konoha will be lifted and Konoha will become a battleground. See, because here's the thing, that's always been something that Jura could do. The leaders of Konoha, who understand that there's basically nothing they can do about Jura, obviously don't want to hand over Himawari. She is the daughter of the 7th Hokage, the greatest Hokage of all time. And even though a lot of them don't know this, the current Jinchuriki of Kurama. They undoubtedly have little to no interest in handing over over Himawari, and it wouldn't be a very Will of Fire thing to do if they were, as the Konoha thing to do would be to battle against Jura to the very last man in order to try and protect Himawari. However, there has been a rather interesting reintroduction of both the elders and the fire daimyo into Boruto's story. Aging political figures who not only have very little connection on what's going on with the world right now, but also who have enough power to make the wrong decision basically every time the opportunity is afforded to them. AKA, they're kind of just the worst, but they are being reintroduced into the story. And while they're being reintroduced to the story and flexing their power on people trying to do their best for the entirety of mankind, like Boruto and Shikamaru, they're also asking questions like, is Konoha even actually necessary? Now that this era of peace has been ushered in by Naruto, and thus these people who are in a position of power so high that they can literally dethrone Shikamaru are beginning to question the validity of Konoha's existence in the first place, are also very much in a position to make a very non-Will of Fire decision, which would be sending Himawari off to meet with Jura with the possibility of her dying if it means that everybody in Konoha could be saved. Because here's the thing, Jura should be able to deduce, based on the fact that he's fought the strongest soldiers that humanity has to offer, and pretty much won without so much as a serious scratch left on him, and also is being treated as a regular citizen within the confines of Konoha, that Konoha has no answer for his ridiculous strength, and therefore he is in a position of power to barter with Konoha. Hey, I don't want Konoha destroyed, you don't want Konoha destroyed, but you probably don't want Konoha destroyed more than I don't want Konoha destroyed. So give me Himawari. It's literally that easy. But what makes the situation even more interesting is the fact that slowly but surely, much to his own chagrin, Jura is becoming more and more human. Whether that was him experiencing the concept of love through Matsuri, or crying while reading a non-fiction book, some of the information and the growth that Jura is undergoing is allowing him to experience emotions, and therefore he might, in the next couple of chapters, be hitting a level of emotional maturity where he doesn't actually feel as though he needs to consume Himawari, and rather simply by sitting with her and conversating with her, he might begin to understand why his heart calls out to her. Kind of like how Matsuri began to understand why her heart called out to Konohamaru when she met him face to face for the first time. And as Jura is constantly in pursuit of more and more information, the kind of information that he could glean from a conversation with Himawari would probably be priceless to him. Not only that, but it would also represent Jura's ability to overcome his animalistic desire to consume and destroy. And while Jura has stated that he believes that Shinju are the perfect beings because of their ability to tap into that animalistic desire, ever since that moment we've actually seen Jura begin to stray from that exact ideology. And the fact that in this leak we get an isolated shot from Inogen, who's sweating and very clearly pressed on the concept that Jura's inside of Konoha, seems to imply to me that Jura is making a push for Himawari, because in the last couple of chapters there's been a heavy focus on Inogen, and more than that, Inogen's desire to protect Himawari. Whether it was Inogen dropping off honey at Himawari's house, or Boruto immediately swaying Inogen over to Team Boruto by saying, hey, you want to protect Himawari? Good, okay, then help us. I believe that Inogen, being the person legitimately concerned about Jura's presence in Konoha, seems to confirm, or at least imply, that Jura's presence inside of Konoha has something to do with his desire for Himawari, and that if Himawari isn't handed over in maybe a week's time, that the moratorium on Konoha will be lifted and all-out war will be brought to the Hidden Leaf Village. See, because not only does this establish a highly contentious talking point within the confines of Konoha, presumably between Shikamaru, the elders, and the fire daimyo, but it also sets up a timeline for the beginning of the all-out battle between the Shinju and Konoha. It builds on the concept of Jura humanizing, and it opens the door for something that we know is going to happen, which is the invasion of Konoha by Mamushi. And therefore, while that might be a lot of information to glean from just one page, I gotta believe that Jura's not just popping into Konoha for a sweet treat. But then again, who knows? I could be wrong. What do you guys think? Do you believe that Jura is trying to discuss possible non-combative futures with Konoha, or do you believe he is just kind of curious about how Anko got so big? Let me know in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go do a photo shoot for this brand new line of anime jewelry being made by Flair & Co.